First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming to listen. This was my second evening over here. And for some reason, this is different. Yesterday, I was very nervous. But today, maybe this is my second time. I'm not so nervous. Maybe because I'm leaving tonight to go back to Singapore after one long week. I don't know, but today I feel very relaxed. So I hope I can give you a good lecture or a good sharing about something that is very close to my heart. Can I ask, my name is Christopher Koo, and I am the Managing Director of Master Consult Services. It is a company based in Singapore. And can I just ask by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Singapore? Have you heard of Singapore? Yes. And one of the things I enjoy about Singapore is that whenever people say, oh, you are from Singapore, and then all the good brand values of Singapore, people will attribute to me. And they say, yes, Singapore is very punctual, Singapore is very efficient, Singapore is an economic miracle. Singapore has got many good success stories. And that's all true. And I was not the man who did all this, but I am one of those who have enjoyed the fruits of one generation of Singaporeans that have built up the country, and I am now enjoying what it is like to be from Singapore. Whenever I tell people I am from Singapore, they say the country is good. There's a lot that we can learn. But today I will talk about a topic that is very important to Singapore, but people don't talk so much about it. There are many reasons for the success of Singapore. The first reason, of course, people talk about the leader, the founder of Singapore, the first Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. He passed away last year, 1 year anniversary just last month. But throughout the success of Singapore, one very strong feature about Singapore's success is that we have a strong reliance on data, on statistics, on intelligence that will help us in our decision making. Mr. Lee and his successors, many of the civil servants, many of the chief executives of the companies, many of the ministers, when there is a decision to be made, it is not a gut decision. It is not a decision depending on the direction of the wind. It is a decision that comes from the head. What are the facts? What are the trends? What is the advantages and disadvantages? And that's how Singapore makes decisions. A strong reliance on data, on statistics, and I have come to understand Singapore's reliance on data and statistics, and I would like to just talk about one aspect of data and statistics in Singapore, and that's how it relates to tourism. Some of you were here yesterday. I would just like to talk a little bit about why is tourism so important in the world? Why is tourism important to Singapore? Here we have a chart from the World Tourism Organization that talks about the number of tourists every year. Way in 1950, just after the war, the number was very small. Less than 10,000 real tourists going to another country for a holiday. But you can see that the chart has continued to increase, and the forecast is for it to grow, and the target is 1.8 billion visitors by the year 2030. This chart tells me a few things. One, tourism continues to grow steadily, right? There are some industries that will go up and then it goes down and it never comes up again. There are some industries that are up here and then it just keeps going. Tourism continues to grow. There are many reasons for that. In the past, when maybe your grandfather and my grandfather were working on the farm, there was no such thing as a holiday. But now my children, they expect a holiday once every year and a short break on a weekend. So tourism is now an entitlement. Tourism continues to grow in spite of world recessions, in spite of oil crisis, in spite of terrorist attack, in spite of earthquakes, tsunamis. It continues to grow. If there is a big problem and it goes down, the next year or two it will go up again. It tells me that tourism is very resilient. Over here it goes down, it comes up again. The other thing about tourism I wanted to show you, it's big. These numbers may not mean anything to us, but it is almost 9% of the world's GDP. That means almost 1/10 of the world's GDP is attributable to tourism. And 1 out of 11 jobs in the world is tourism related. Tourism is also, today, the fastest growing industry in the world. It's not telecommunications, it's not chemicals, it's not petroleum, it's not electronics, it's tourism, the fastest growing industry in the world. And the forecast, like I said, is 1.8 billion visitors by 2030. This is to show you how fast tourism is growing. In the year 1950, just after the war, if you look at the top 15 destinations in the world, those top 15 destinations accounted for 98% of all tourism. In other words, all the people in the world were going to just 15 destinations. By 1970, the top 15 destinations only accounted for 75% of total arrivals. And by 2010, only 50% of the top 15 destinations make up, go to the top 15 destinations. What that means is that there are more and more countries interested in tourism. And that's true. Even today, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has suddenly told me, we are interested in tourism. 20 years ago, it wasn't the case. And 30 years ago, when I started in tourism, very few people considered tourism to be a desirable industry. They would rather have automotive, chemicals, finance, all these industries. But now, whenever I go and visit a country, the tourism minister will say, oh, Mr. Koo, can you help us build up tourism? Because we want some tourism in our country. So there are many new destinations appearing every year. There are many new countries, provinces, and cities that are discovering the attraction of tourism. And let me tell you something. It's not international tourism that is driving world tourism. It is domestic tourism. I have worked many projects in China and in India. And in both China and India, domestic tourism accounts for 95% of their tourism industry. Only 5% is international tourism. And the figure is about the same here in the kingdom. Why is tourism important? It is important because it diversifies your economy. In your case, 75-80% is oil driven. Expand tourism so that there is a stronger leg to stand on. In some other countries like India and China, maybe it's agriculture. They want tourism to diversify their economy. Because tourism is a source of foreign direct investments, it's a foreign exchange earner, it's an employment generator, and more recently we've noticed that it supports heritage conservation. When I talk to politicians, they are very interested in employment generator. They want to know how many new jobs will tourism bring. And let me tell you, tourism brings in good jobs, good paying jobs. Of course, there will be the waiter and the counter staff who is selling things, but it also brings in jobs for the managers and for the directors who have to run these tourism facilities. One of the most accurate ways of measuring the impact of tourism is called the tourism satellite accounts. Now, it is a fairly new concept from the national accounting system, because the national accounting system measures what is the output of the country, but it measures it in a way that does not recognize tourism. Because you and I know tourism is not a straightforward vertical industry. Tourism, of course, has hotels, airlines, but it also has taxis, it also has tour guides, it has restaurants. So these are spread out, and many times people don't realize how important the tourist is, that it affects the jobs of the tour guides, of the shop owners, of the restaurant owners, and they are also involved in tourism. The farmers who supply tomatoes for the tourists is also affected. The tourism satellite account is a statistical framework, and it's used to measure the impact of tourism. The problem is it takes a long time and effort to implement the tourism satellite account. I have not had a chance to speak to your people at the Commission about whether you have a tourism satellite account. A tourism satellite account for Singapore has measured that tourism accounts for 5.5% of Singapore's GDP. For some of you who have seen Singapore, you'll see we've got financial services, we've got trading, we've got banking, we've got manufacturing. Tourism is actually very small, only 5.5%. The tourism satellite account allows a lot of things to be measured, and then you can compare. Is tourism more important, or how much does tourism account in your industry? I give you an example. In 2012, New Zealand was able to come up with their tourism satellite accounts for that year, and then they are able to say, so imagine if you can tell your government tourism is worth so much in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. For New Zealand, total tourism expenditure was $23.4 billion. International tourism expenditure was so much it went up, and it increased New Zealand's total exports. Domestic tourism accounted for so much. So these are solid numbers that you can use to help convince authorities. Because if you don't have a solid number, you will always end up saying, tourism is good, but I don't know how much. I don't know whether it's 2% or 8%. This is one way that you can measure it. Even over here, in that year, in 2012, New Zealand hosted the World Cup. Not FIFA World Cup, but the Rugby World Cup. And they were able to measure how important, how that World Cup itself, it brought 4.4% increase in visitors because of that World Cup. So you can measure the importance of one event also. Now this is Master Consult Services. I have been involved in tourism for the last 30 years. I started with the Singapore Tourism Board, so I work in the government for 15 years. 10 years I was based in Europe. First I was based in Frankfurt in Germany. I speak German. I studied in Germany. That's why they asked me to go to Frankfurt. And then after Frankfurt I went to London. So I had 10 years in Germany. I had a good time there. Both my sons were born in Germany, so I hope to bring them back again one day. But after I left the tourism board, I joined an international consulting firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers for a few years, and then I started my own company to provide tourism consultancy. What that means is I help destinations to position, to develop, and to market themselves competitively in today's tourism environment. What does my career history have to do with research and statistics? My last position in the Singapore Tourism Board, I was the research director for Singapore Tourism Board. So I was in charge of all the tourism data, collection of data, interpretation, and publishing of reports, and to tell my bosses whether our tourism is up or down, how are the hotels doing, how are the travel agents doing. I was in charge of the research department. And when I went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, I hope you can hear me because of the noise. When I went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was the Asia Pacific Director of Research for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I performed a similar role there. Let me introduce Singapore to you as a tourist destination. Some of you have said you've been to Singapore. Have you been to Singapore? You know that Singapore is so small. It's very small. When I came to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I realized how big it is. You can fly for hours and you haven't reached one border to the other border. In Singapore, it's only 700 square kilometers. We used to have a joke. Why do you have speed limits in Singapore? Okay, otherwise the car will drive off the island. Singapore is so small, it has no natural attractions. We have got no mountains. We have got no beaches. We have got no nice views. We don't have a domestic market. There's less than 4 million Singaporeans in the island. We don't even have a strong culture, or what we call an indigenous culture, because we are 75% from China. My forefathers, my great-great-grandfather came from China. My friend, his great-great-grandfather came from India. There are some people who come from the region. So we have no culture of our own. And we don't even have our own tourism ministry. We don't even have, we have a minister who looks after us, but he's called the Minister for Trade and Industry. But in spite of this, Singapore does very well in tourism. Very well. This is a map, or this is a chart of Singapore's tourism. You will see that, like the world, Singapore's tourism continues to grow. It continues to grow, but there are a couple of things I want to share with you. One, there was a world recession. This is when I joined tourism in Singapore. World recession, everybody thought, oh, there's no growth, but it recovered. Asian financial crisis. We thought the world is going to end. Came down here. After 15 months, it went up again. Over here, I'm not sure if you remember SARS. Right? You all have MERS. We had SARS in 2002. It was very bad. Singapore was very badly hit. It went down. But remember what I said about tourism? It is very resilient. It goes down, it will come up again. And then in the year 2008, 2009, in Singapore, we call it the Lehman Brothers crisis. I think for you, you call it the financial crisis. What happens after that? Do you think Singapore's tourism will go up or go down after this crisis? Let's take a look. It continued to go up. In the year 2014, 15.1 million visitors. In 2015, 15.5. What does 15.5 million visitors mean? 15.5 million visitors means every month we have 1.5 million visitors come to Singapore, 700 square kilometers with nothing in it. All right? But what I would like to show you is how we have developed our tourism to make that these 15.5 million people want to come to Singapore and spend money in Singapore. You know, in Singapore, we do not pay so much attention to this number. We are not so worried about 15.6 million or 15.5 million. That's just head count. We are more interested in how much they spend. How much they spend in Singapore when they are there. So we track this figure a lot more. This figure is tourism receipts. How much money do the tourists spend in Singapore? And that's the figure that all of us pay attention. We don't pay so much attention to the head count. We pay more attention to tourism receipts. Okay, let me give you now a snapshot of the top 15 markets from Singapore, into Singapore, and who they are. Number one is Indonesia, 3 million visitors. And it's very natural because Indonesia is our big neighbor. It's the neighbor, and there are 200 million people there. Of course, we have a lot of visitors coming in. Not surprising, China is 2.2 million visitors. But do you know that in this year, it was a 25% drop because the Chinese have also squeezed themselves and they've restricted travel. So there was a big drop. The year before that, the Chinese was more than Indonesia. The rest, you can see all the way down to Germany, 250,000 arrivals from Germany. Together, these 15 markets add up to more than 70% of our arrivals. And I can tell you what that means from a strategy point of view. We are quite safe. When China market dropped by 25%, our overall figures only dropped by 0.5%. So we are diversified. All right? It was a deliberate strategy for us to choose diversification. We need to make sure that all our major markets are there, but we don't rely on one or two markets. I remember when I was talking in Hawaii in 1996, and they only have two markets, Japan and mainland USA. And exactly at that year, both markets were having recession. So the two main markets went down. The whole tourism industry was in big trouble. So if you rely too much on a few markets, that is one of your problems. Singapore diversifies its market, but we don't only just measure the numbers. We also measure tourism receipts. Remember what I said? We measure how much people spend and where they spend. So in Singapore, we know that 19% of the expenditure goes to shopping. 23% is spent on accommodation. Food and beverage is 10%. There's some sightseeing, there's some other components, but we understand our market. We understand who is spending or where the money is being spent. And we also break it up by quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, and quarter four. Not only do we do that, we also understand at a country level. At a country level, we have this, and you say, Christopher, why do you want to have all this information? Is it useful? I say it's very useful. We understand the different markets and their characteristics. Let me give you an example. One of our markets is, I think, number 10, or USA. The USA market is very good. All our five-star hotels, the hoteliers, they love the USA market. Why? Because the USA market, they love to stay in five-star hotels. But they don't shop in Singapore. They don't shop. All right? Look at the Chinese market. The Chinese don't like to stay in five-star hotels. They'll stay in the three-star hotels. They'll put 3 in a room. But they spend so much money on shopping. And because you can understand how the different markets work, then you can make policy decisions so that it is the right decision. I remember in one of our tourism conferences, there was a hotel general manager. Oh, he's an American guy. He said, oh, we should do more promotion in Europe and the USA because they stay in my hotel. Now, if we did not have this data, we cannot answer him. But we say, you are right. The Americans stay in your hotel, but they don't shop. The Chinese and the Indian visitors, they don't stay in five-star hotels, but they spend so much money. They buy gold, they buy jewelry, they buy clothes, electronics. And as policy makers, we need to understand. And then we are able to say, yes, we will not just focus on the US, we focus on ASEAN markets, Asian markets, and in our marketing campaigns, we promote that which works for them. So this kind of information is very useful, and let me tell you, it's not cheap to collect information like this. I was told today, I sat into the conference at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and they said one of the weaknesses in Saudi Arabia is data collection, to get good and reliable data. And let's see what we can do. Maybe we can improve data collection in tourism first. For those of you who've come to see Singapore, sometimes it's an eye-opener. Only 36% of visitors are there on holiday. We have almost 30% for business and MICE, or business conventions. 15% is visiting friends and relatives. Under others, we've got a lot of other types of tourists, medical tourists, cruise tourism. So those all come on government visits and all that. Singapore's tourism development has developed since 1965, and we have not been the same product from the beginning. But throughout the time in Singapore, we have always had a master plan to guide us through. The plan has changed. Every 5 years, every 10 years, it changes because the environment changes. The emphasis change. And they've got different names. In 1968, just when our tourism board was started, they call it a tourist plan. Then they call it a tourism development plan. And the title sounds nicer and nicer as it goes along. Right now, it's called a Tourism Compass 2020, and the latest chief executive, the new initiative, doesn't have a very sexy title. He just calls it Qualitourism. If we look at the plans from a macro perspective, you will realize that the plans have got different emphasis. In the first few years, the first few decades, it was just taking stock. What do we have here? Do we have enough hotels? Are we strong in our legislation? How do we... So taking stock, set up the legal framework, make sure it's good. And by the 1980s, we focused on hardware, making sure we have enough attractions. We invested in precincts, revitalizing certain roads, building new attractions. 10 years later, we started focusing on software. And then we started looking at new markets, new segments, how to strengthen the industry. And right now, the idea is quality tourism. Because Singapore's tourism at 15.5 million arrivals, we cannot add in another 15.5 million. We have no more space. So we need to say, how can we get higher quality tourism? Not only do we focus on hardware, a lot of people come to Singapore and they're impressed with the hardware. But let me tell you, the success of Singapore lies not in the hardware, but in the software, in the processes. And Singapore, the Tourism Board recognizes the role of various associations. In other words, we believe that the Travel Agents Association, Tour Operators Association have a very important role to play. The Association of Attractions, the Hotel Association, Museum Roundtable. Each of these are helped by the government so that they can galvanize the industry, upgrade the industry. We work with Orchard Road Association and all this. You see, the thing is, in Singapore, when your industry becomes big enough, you realize you cannot control all the hotels. You have to work through the Hotel Association, get them to set the standards. All right? So, I mean, these are some of the ideas and some of the experiences that we have gathered through the years. But throughout the development, there has been a strong emphasis on tourism data and research. We can track hotel occupancy, average rate. We know how the industry is working because we have our hand on the pulse of the industry. And like I said, it's a commitment in resources. So I have seen too many wrong decisions made in tourism. I have been working as a consultant now for 15 years. I go to China, I go to India, I go to Malaysia, and I see many examples of tourism projects where I say, why do you build a 5-star hotel? You only need a 4-star or 3-star hotel, 200 rooms is fine. He has to build a 500-room 5-star hotel. And what happens? He cannot fill it up, so he depressed the price, and everybody suffers. I have seen so many wrong decisions made, and I look at this and I realize good data is the foundation of sound decision making. To make the decision, you must have good facts. You must have good data. And in Singapore, I remember once I told my boss, well, we don't have enough data, can we make a decision? He said, what's there to make a decision? If you don't have the facts, you cannot make a good decision. Good tourism analysis is the basis of good financial investments. If somebody is going to invest 20 million, 40 million, $80 million in a hotel or a development or whatever, he must have the security that there has been some planning ahead, that there's a forecast of visitor arrivals. Maybe it is domestic visitors, but at least there's a plan in place. And good intelligence is the basis of timely action. In other words, not only do you look inside, you look outside. What's happening in China? What's happening in India? What's happening in the US? What's happening with oil prices? What will happen 5 years, 10 years from now? And that is how, in Singapore, we believe we try to be very agile by having good intelligence. Now, I've shared that every destination, whether it is Paris or Singapore or Saudi Arabia, needs to have some essentials, some infrastructure like places of interest. Are your places of interest of good enough quality? Do they meet visitor satisfaction levels? Hotels, museums, galleries, beaches, are the accommodations enough? Are they the right type? Are there enough food? What is the quality of the service? Enough festivals and events. So these are hard infrastructure that needs to be taken care of. But I also say we need to measure the intangibles, memorable experiences. If somebody were to come into your town and spend 3 days there, will they say this was a good holiday? These are some of the things I say must be built in and planned. That, like I said, there are too many projects, too many wrong decisions in tourism. Sometimes there's just too many projects. All right? I only will have 150 or 200,000 visitors, but I'm putting so many things in there and they don't have enough business. All right? If I have too many shopping centers and not enough visitors or tourists or shoppers, then everybody's going to suffer. If it's wrongly dimensioned, what do I mean by wrongly dimensioned? I'm supposed to, well, analysis tells me I should build a 200-room hotel but the boss says I need to build a 500-room hotel. So that in itself, you cannot fight the market and expect to fill up a 500-room hotel and be profitable. You have a product-market mismatch. You say, oh, I want to attract domestic tourists and families, but your products are not suitable for families. Your hotels don't have large rooms, you don't have villas. Then it's a mismatch. They want to come, but there's no appropriate accommodations. They want to go to the beach, but you don't have beach. So there's a wrong product market mismatch. So you have to plan these things. Sometimes it's too large, sometimes it's under-resourced. And a lot of times, wrong marketing. I will market to the wrong market. Right now, there's a decision to say, should Saudi Arabia develop tourism? I say yes, but don't go overseas. Look domestically. There's so much you can do domestically that you can alleviate the outflow of cash, okay? But so don't target the wrong market. If you start saying, I need to go and target Europeans and all that, that's wrong marketing. So a lot of this goes back to making right decisions and having the right tourism data and analysis. How do you set up a tourism data collection infrastructure? Make sure you have a regular collection of basic data. What do I mean by basic data? How many people come into your country or come into your city? How many people come into your hotel? How many people visit your attraction or your museum? You must be able to say, I have this number for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, January to December, and then you can understand that the market changes. For the business owners, you know there is seasonality. It goes up, it goes down. But if you don't collect the data, you say, oh, summer is down, but I think it starts in June, or I think it starts in July. Have the data. You need to measure capacity and utilization. So this is the hotels. Hotels, are they running 80%? Are they running 60%? Because if they are running at 90%, there's no point doing more marketing. You cannot have more rooms. The hotels will say, sorry, we are full. You need to measure capacity, utilization. You need to measure comparative and competitive sets. In other words, in Singapore, I need to know what is Malaysia doing, what is Indonesia doing, so I know what is my neighbor doing. And if they have a new attraction, will they take away my market? In your case, if you are a hotel or you're an attraction, you need to know what else make your competitive set or your comparative set. This is very basic, but let me just go through this. There are three types of statistics. Volume statistics, how many? Tourist characteristics, what type of people are coming? And expenditure. And very important to collect these three types of statistics. Volume is easy. How many people come into your hotel or attraction or museum, you know? And we have an idea about this. Characteristics is more difficult to collect, but it helps you when you do your marketing. Do they all come from within the city of Riyadh? Or do you have people from the next city? Are there people who are coming in from outside? Or it can be, is it all old people coming to see your place? Or is it young? Are they the rich? Are they poor? Is it teenagers? So there are many types of ways of collecting, but you need to be able to understand what information to collect and then capture that information. Structure of trip, attitudes to the destination. These are all the kind of information. If you have unlimited funds, there's a lot that can be done, but most of us know we don't have unlimited funds. So you need to know how best to collect this type, and this type of data. More important, how much do they spend? From a destination point of view, from Singapore's point of view, we know Chinese spend so much. Indians spend so much, Americans spend so much. Where do they spend it? Then you can understand what they are doing, and so we can do the marketing correctly. So we can improve our services to them correctly. Coming to an end, you have a good tourism statistics, so you have a good visitor profile. Then you know how many visitors come. Then you can forecast, is it going up or is it going down? Is your marketing working? If you've put in $100,000 in a marketing plan, but the visitor arrivals go down, then you know it hasn't been working. But if you don't measure your visitor arrivals, you don't know whether your marketing is working or not. It can predict future development. It can help you get more infrastructure. If your hotel occupancy is going up and up and up, then it makes sense. Maybe I should do an extension to my hotel. I should do something else to capture these numbers. Investments in tourism research, like I said, is a real investment, and many countries don't spend the money. They don't spend enough money on tourism research. So you can't tell. At most they can say, oh, my main market is GCC. Really? 80% or 90%? I don't know. It's a main market, it's GCC. Is it Bahrain or is it? I don't know. It's GCC. So it's very difficult to make decisions based on if you don't have the facts. But to get that kind of information, you need to put in the infrastructure. It is through surveys, it is through counting mechanisms, interviews, and it increases. If you've got all the basic data, then you want more. Can I have characteristics data? Then can I have expenditure data? And it always increases. So research, analysis, and reporting must be impartial and independent. What do I mean by that? I have worked in a country where I sat down with a research manager and I said, so last year, how many visitors? Oh, he said 5% up. I said, that's good, 5% up. I said, how many? I don't know, but I'm going to report to my boss it's 5% up because my boss wants it to be 5% up. And I said, have you actually counted the numbers? He said, no. I don't have the manpower to count. I don't know where are all the forms, but I will tell him it's 5%. So it's not accurate, it's not impartial, and a lot of times then I won't trust that data. Invest in good and qualified personnel who can intelligently interpret this mountain of data you collect. You can collect a lot of information, but you need people who can look at the data, analyze it, and then make conclusions. There are people who like to use Microsoft Word. There are people who like to use Microsoft PowerPoint. And there are people who like to use Microsoft Excel. If I had to hire anybody, it's people who like to use Microsoft Excel. They are the ones who are analytical. And then to be able to make that extra step to interpret the data and say it's reaching a critical point. So invest in good qualified personnel because only reliable data and analysis can convince your big bosses. Tourism has a problem in all countries. We cannot convince our Prime Minister and our Finance Minister that tourism is important. We always say, yes, it employs jobs, but we don't know how many. I say it's good for GDP, but we don't know how much. If you can measure this, you can tell 6% in Singapore. So our Prime Minister cannot say it's not important. If we say it's 150,000 jobs, he cannot say it's not important. So only if you collect this kind of information, then you can start to show there's a growth and it's important. With that, I want to thank you. I've taken enough of your time. If you have any questions, please ask me right now. Can I have the microphone? I have just shared with you a little bit of what is in my heart. I think you can tell that I'm very passionate about tourism data, tourism statistics, that you need to invest and have good people. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your time. How far the SWOT analysis is important in these studies?
Okay. SWOT analysis is one of the most important tools that I use as a consultant to do the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I use that when I do a tourism audit of a destination. But again, to come up with a SWOT analysis, you need good data, right? Do you have enough hotels? Are the hotels good? Do I put it in a strength category or weakness category? I need a decision. So the SWOT analysis is important, but it needs to be supported by good data. Yes. There's no such thing as, both have to do at the same time. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for this very fruitful presentation. Thank you. My question, you mentioned that the growth of the investment or growth of the tourism sector is irrelevant of financial crisis, if I understand correctly, and maybe terrorists and other things. You show that from real data that it's growing. But this, I don't know, I have to be convinced about this. If I look at, for example, take Egypt. The tourist sector is affected strongly because of what's going on in Egypt. So how can I...
Let me qualify. Thank you for your question. Let me qualify by saying, well, the question is, I said that tourism will recover and it is independent of these tragedies that happen. I look from a macro perspective. As a country, I know that tourism will grow. But I also know that when it happens, this company and this company and this company will suffer. And maybe he will have to go out of business. But I know that in 1 year from now, when the business goes up, somebody else will do business. So I look from a macro perspective or national perspective, but I also understand that individual companies will feel many of this crisis. This is an opportunity for these countries to prepare, to diversify, so that it is not so badly damaged when it is hit. This is the what we call diversification. I remember when I was in Germany, and there was one tour operator that specialized in Egypt. And this tour operator does a lot of work in Egypt. But I convinced the tour operator, why don't you do a Southeast Asia program also? And I remember in 1998, there was a problem in Egypt, and the whole market fell. Fortunately, she had another business to keep the business afloat somewhat. So the diversification principle works, but I understand that certain countries, it is affected directly by these disasters. One last question. Somebody wanted a question here? No more. No more questions. I will answer your question directly. Okay?
Can I ask you something like outside later?
I will ask you, I will come to you later. Okay? Thank you very much. I thank you for all your questions and for being such an attentive audience to me. I will be here. If you want my name cards, I will talk to you later. Okay? Thank you.